Pick it up. That's what you're paid for." The words didn't echo. They landed, heavy and deliberate, in the center of the marble lobby like something that had weight. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A rolling suitcase clicked once more across the polished floor, then silence swallowed it. Alina Brooks stood still beside her housekeeping cart, one hand resting lightly on the metal handle, the other holding a folded white towel she hadn't realized she'd stopped moving. At her feet, a sleek black keycard lay face down, just where it had been kicked. No, placed with force, by Marcus Hallberg, CEO of Hallberg International Hotels. The overhead chandelier cast fractured light across the marble, scattering reflections that flickered faintly against her shoes. Around them, guests pretended not to look. A man in a navy blazer adjusted his watch without checking the time. A woman near the concierge desk lowered her voice to a whisper that didn't quite hide its curiosity. Marcus didn't raise his voice again. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room in a way that made everything else feel smaller. "We don't leave things lying around here," he added, tone calm, precise, practiced. Alina's gaze dropped to the card, then lifted, not to his face, but just past his shoulder, as if measuring the space rather than the man. Her breath stayed steady. If there was embarrassment, it didn't show the way people expected it to. It settled somewhere deeper, quieter. She stepped forward, bent at the waist, and picked up the card. The marble was cool through the thin sole of her shoe. Her fingers closed around the plastic, smooth, ordinary, something designed to open doors. She stood again and placed it carefully into Marcus's outstretched hand. He didn't thank her. He didn't acknowledge the gesture at all, as if the exchange had been an inevitable correction, not a moment between two people. Somewhere above them, beyond the polished ceiling and the curated stillness of the lobby, a server rack pulsed faintly in a restricted room 3 floors up. A small red indicator light blinked once. Then again, not urgent enough to trigger alarms. Not yet, but it lingered, a quiet signal buried beneath layers of systems designed to prioritize louder failures. Alina turned back to her cart. The wheels squeaked softly as she shifted it an inch to the side, aligning it perfectly with the seam in the marble tiles. Her movements were precise, almost measured, like someone who understood that attention lived in details others ignored. Marcus had already moved on, adjusting his cuff, issuing a low instruction to the operations manager trailing behind him. "I want everything perfect before the investors arrive," he said, not looking back. "No surprises." The manager nodded quickly, scribbling something onto a tablet that reflected the chandelier light in sharp angles. Alina resumed folding the towel. One corner to the other, edges aligned, pressure even. The fabric whispered as it moved. For a brief second, her eyes flicked toward the security camera mounted high in the corner of the lobby, its small red steady and unblinking. Then back to her hands. Invisible wasn't the same as unimportant, but most people never learned the difference. And somewhere above, the red light blinked again, patient, waiting, as if it knew that the only person who might notice it was the one everyone had just been told to look past. The hallway lights on the 32nd floor never fully turned off. They only dimmed to a soft, artificial dusk that made time feel suspended, like morning and night had agreed to blur into something in between. And Alina Brooks moved through that quiet with the steady rhythm of someone who had learned how to exist without disturbing it. Her cart rolling beside her, wheels whispering against the carpet, each step measured, each breath controlled, as if the building itself demanded a kind of discipline from those who worked in its shadows. She checked the room number on the door, 3214, then slid her keycard through the reader, the small green light blinking once before the lock clicked open. A sound so subtle most guests never noticed it, but to her it was confirmation, access, permission granted in a world where she was rarely given any without condition. Inside, the room still carried the faint scent of cologne and expensive linen. The bed partially turned down, a glass of water untouched on the nightstand, city lights stretching beyond the window in a grid of glowing lines that looked almost calm from this height, like nothing could go wrong when everything appeared so organized from far enough away. She stepped in, closing the door quietly behind her, and began her work, smoothing the sheets, aligning the pillows, folding the edges with the precision she had taught herself over Years of repetition, not because anyone had shown her how, but because doing it right felt like the only thing she could control. Control was a quiet kind of power, the kind that did not ask for attention, the kind that lived in small decisions no one else saw. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. A low vibration she ignored at first, finishing the corner of the bed before pulling it out. The screen lighting her face in a soft blue glow, a message from her mother blinking at the top, asking if she had eaten, asking if she would be home before sunrise. The same questions every night, not out of habit but out of concern shaped by years of uncertainty. Alina typed back quickly, just enough to reassure, then slipped the phone away and moved toward the desk, wiping its surface in slow, even strokes, her eyes catching the reflection of the television screen. Still dark, still silent, but not entirely empty. There was a flicker there, faint, almost easy to miss, a distortion that did not belong to the clean lines of the interface, like static trying to push through something designed to stay controlled. She paused, cloth hovering just above the surface, her head tilting slightly as she watched it for another second. Then it disappeared. Most people would have ignored it. Most people would have assumed it was nothing, a glitch, a momentary signal issue. But Alina did not move right away. She set the cloth down slowly and stepped closer, her reflection shifting across the screen as she reached for the remote and powered the television on. The system booted quickly, the hotel interface appearing smooth, polished, exactly as it was meant to be. No flicker, no distortion, just perfection on display. But something in her chest tightened. Not fear, not panic, something more precise than that, something that felt like recognition without confirmation. She navigated the menu once, twice, watching for any delay, any irregularity, but everything responded exactly on time. Still, she did not trust it. She had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous problems were the ones that did not announce themselves, the ones that waited quietly until no one was looking. She turned the screen off again, the room returning to its dim stillness, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, listening not for sound, but for pattern, for anything that felt out of place. Nothing came. Just the hum of the building, the distant elevator chime, the quiet pulse of systems doing what they were built to do. She exhaled slowly and returned to her work, finishing the room with the same care as before, but her mind no longer fully in the motions. Because somewhere between the polished surfaces and the silent systems, something had shifted, and she could feel it, even if no one else could. And in a building where everything was designed to look perfect, the smallest imperfection was never just an accident. The evening passed slower than usual, the dimming light creeping along the walls of the hotel, shifting through the cracks between the curtains in the lobby, the kind of light that seemed to signal an end, yet felt pregnant with something more. Alina moved through it, silently, methodically, like she always did, but something had shifted, something that wasn't supposed to be there. She had finished the room she'd been assigned and was back on her cart, now heading down the hall, the same hallway where earlier, Marcus had made his presence felt with nothing more than a few words, a glance, a dismissive gesture. But she wasn't thinking of him anymore, not in the way she had before. She was thinking of that flicker, the small but undeniable distortion that had appeared on the television screen, and how it had nagged at her until now, how it still nagged at her as she pushed the cart down the quiet hallway, the wheels humming softly beneath her. The lights overhead flickered once, a sharp, sudden pulse that caught her attention. It was gone as quickly as it came, but her pulse quickened. She stopped, just for a moment, to steady herself, to make sure she wasn't imagining things. There was nothing more to do in this hall, nothing left to tidy. Yet, she could not shake the feeling that something was about to happen. That quiet warning, a hum in the back of her mind, wouldn't let go. She turned the corner, still scanning the hallway, and that was when she saw it. A small red light on the emergency exit sign, blinking in the exact same pattern as before. Alina stopped in her tracks, staring at it. The quiet pulse that had been there all along, waiting. She should have known better. She should have just walked away. But something made her pause. This wasn't just a glitch or a malfunction. She could feel it now, the weight of it, the sudden pull of understanding she hadn't had earlier. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong from the moment she stepped into this building, from the moment she'd been dismissed by Marcus. There was a crack in the system, something no one else had noticed, something no one else cared enough to catch. Her hand instinctively moved to her pocket, where she had left her phone. She pulled it out and checked the time, then quickly typed a message to her mother, something short, something reassuring, even though her thoughts were far from calm. "I'm okay, don't worry. I'll be home soon." She hit send before even considering whether or not it would actually help. But there was no time to dwell on it. The hotel was quiet, the hum of the systems louder now in her ears, the soft whoosh of air from the ventilation above, the rustle of her uniform as she shifted her weight. There was a quiet that hung over everything, an eerie stillness that made the walls feel too close, the floor too hard beneath her feet. A sense of something just on the edge, something looming, waiting. She didn't know how long she had stood there, frozen in place, before the security door at the far end of the hall opened with a quiet hiss. Her heart skipped a beat, and instinctively, she stepped back. But no one came out. The door slid shut again, silently. And then she heard it, a small beep, almost imperceptible. She glanced up at the hallway security camera just above her head, and the red light flashed again, this time briefly, before turning off entirely. For a split second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if nothing had happened, the hotel continued. Guests passed her on their way to their rooms, oblivious. The sound of keys jangled in the distance. No one was paying attention to the warning lights, to the signs. But Alina knew. She had always known when something was wrong, even when no one else could see it. She pushed the cart forward again, this time with purpose. There was no going back now. She had seen, heard it, felt it, and she couldn't unsee it. The hotel had secrets, and she was about to learn just how deep those secrets ran. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, but it was the stillness that greeted her as Alina stepped inside that made her pause. The air felt thicker here, heavier somehow, like the very building was holding its breath. She glanced at the indicator light above, watching it blink from floor to floor, but the sound of the elevator moving felt muted, distant. A small flicker from the corner of her eye caught her attention, and she turned her head, but there was nothing to see. Just the soft hum of the elevator lights and the floor number ticking down, floor by floor. It didn't make sense. Why did it feel like something was off? Why did everything feel too quiet? Her fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the railing, the metal cold against her skin. She was halfway to the lobby, to the one place she knew she could find some semblance of normalcy in a night that had already begun to slip through her fingers. Yet, the moment she stepped out of the elevator, it became clear that whatever was happening had already started to unravel, and there was no stopping it now. A muffled voice echoed down the hallway, growing louder as she moved toward the main office. It was the night manager, talking to someone she couldn't see, his voice low but unmistakably agitated. "No, that's not what I said. We have a system in place for this, so don't just..." He trailed off and Alina moved closer, quietly enough that she was almost invisible. The voice she hadn't expected to hear next made her stop dead in her tracks. "I've already told you, there's no time to waste. If we don't do something about this now, it could cost us everything. Do you understand that?" It was Marcus Hallberg, the very same man who had brushed her off earlier, who had dismissed her in front of everyone. The CO. Alina's pulse quickened, the words a jumbled mess in her mind, but she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't pretend anymore. This was bigger than she had thought. As she slowly crept closer to the door of the office, she noticed a few other staff members huddled in the hall, all tense, talking in hushed voices, all looking down at their phones as if waiting for something. Anything that would give them clarity in a situation that made no sense. She held her breath as she quietly turned the corner, just enough to peek through the glass panel in the door. Marcus stood at the center of the room, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. He was speaking to the night manager, whose face was etched with worry. "We've already lost a significant amount of data. I need the IT team in here now, and I need them to know exactly how bad this is." Marcus's voice was firm, cold. It was the voice of someone used to making decisions, but there was a tremor there now, a crack that hadn't been there before. Alina's mind raced. She had seen enough. The glitch she had noticed, the flicker she had felt in the system, it was connected. Everything was connected, and she had just walked straight into the middle of something no one else had seen coming. She slowly stepped away from the door, her heart beating loudly in her chest. She couldn't be a part of this. She wasn't supposed to know. She wasn't supposed to be involved. But the world around her was already spinning, and she could feel it tugging at her, pulling her into something much larger than a hotel room, than a moment of humiliation in the lobby. This was a crisis, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The red light on the emergency exit sign blinked again in the hallway, unnoticed by anyone else. She wasn't the only one who saw it anymore. She wasn't the only one who could feel it, the subtle crack in the system, the low hum of something about to break. The hotel wasn't just a place that needed cleaning. It was a place that needed saving. And Alina, for reasons she couldn't fully understand, was the only one who could do it. Alina had never imagined a night like this. The weight of what she had uncovered pressed down on her chest. But there was no escape from it. She couldn't turn away. She couldn't ignore the signs that had been building up for hours. The building, the systems, the faint glitches she had noticed, all of it was part of something much bigger, and somehow it all pointed to her. The realization hit her like a jolt of electricity. This wasn't just a malfunction, a technical glitch she could walk away from. This was a breach, something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated, and it was up to her to stop it before it was too late. The hallway was quieter now, the guests from earlier long gone, leaving the hotel feeling more like a maze of cold, silent rooms than the bustling establishment it had been just hours ago. Alina's heart was still racing as she moved swiftly down the hallway, her footsteps the only sound breaking the silence. She didn't stop when she passed the elevator or the service desk. She kept walking, her mind focused, her body moving on instinct, driven by something stronger than fear. She had to get to the IT room. She had to warn them, figure out what was happening. The door to the IT office was locked, but Alina didn't hesitate. She glanced around, checking to make sure no one was watching, then reached for the spare keycard she kept in her pocket. The light on the lock turned green with a soft click, and she pushed the door open, slipping inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the glow of several monitors scattered across the desks. The hum of computers filled the air, a quiet buzz that almost drowned out the sound of her breathing. She moved quickly, her fingers finding the keyboard with practiced ease. She didn't have time to waste. She knew what she was looking for, the system logs, the data that would show her what had gone wrong. Alina's fingers flew over the keys as she pulled up the files, scanning them quickly. Her eyes widened as the details began to emerge. It wasn't just one small breach. It was an entire network failure, a carefully hidden backdoor that had been planted weeks ago. Whoever had done this had been patient, meticulous, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the problem was, it wasn't just about stealing data or financial information. This was about control, the kind of control that Marcus and his team had worked so hard to establish, the kind of control they were willing to destroy everything for. Her mind raced as she read through the logs, piecing together what had happened. The system had been compromised from the inside, manipulated subtly over time. Alina couldn't help but think about Marcus, how he had brushed her off, dismissed her like she was nothing more than a maid. But now, everything she had noticed, every small detail was adding up. The cracks in the system were widening, and Marcus had no idea that his own security had been used against him, that someone had been inside his network, working silently to bring it all down. Alina felt a rush of determination flood through her, cutting through the fear. She had to act fast. She had to stop this before it was too late. She reached for the emergency protocols, setting the system into lockdown mode. It wouldn't be permanent, but it would buy them some time. Just enough time to trace the source of the breach, to stop it before it spread any further. The screen blinked as the system kicked into action, and Alina's heart skipped a beat. She had done it. For now, at least. But she knew it wasn't over. Couldn't be. She had seen enough to know that there were still pieces of the puzzle missing, still cracks in the walls waiting to be exposed. And the worst part was, she didn't even know who was behind it. Could be anyone in the hotel, anyone Marcus trusted. She had no allies here, no one she could turn to for help. No one but herself. Alina stood there, her fingers still resting on the keyboard, her mind racing as she pieced together the next steps in her head. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her. The responsibility, the danger, the uncertainty of what was to come. But there was no turning back now. She couldn't go back to cleaning rooms. She couldn't go back to being invisible. Not after this. Not when she knew just how deep the rot went. The door to the IT office opened suddenly, and Alina froze, her heart racing as she turned to face the intruder. She expected to see one of the staff members, someone coming to check on her. But when she saw who it was, her blood ran cold. Marcus Hallberg stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he looked at her with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Then Marcus took a step forward, his voice low, almost cautious. "What are you doing here?" Marcus stood in the doorway, his posture stiff, his eyes narrowed as he looked at Alina. The seconds stretched between them, thick with the tension of unspoken words. Alina's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain still, her mind racing for something, anything, to say. She had known this moment was coming. She had known that eventually, Marcus would find out what she had done. But nothing had prepared her for the weight of his gaze, the silent judgment that seemed to hang in the air between them. She could feel it, could almost taste it in the thick silence. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, still and motionless, like she was frozen in time. But the question he had asked, simple as it was, left her with no room to hide. "What are you doing here?" His voice was calm, too calm, like someone who was trying to hold control over a situation that was slipping through his fingers. Alina's mind raced, but her response came out slowly, deliberately. "I was fixing the issue with the system," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling in her chest. "There's a breach. It's been going on for days." She didn't meet his eyes as she spoke. She couldn't. She wasn't sure what she would see there if she did. She could feel his presence behind her, could hear the slight shift of his weight as he took a step forward. "A breach," Marcus repeated, his voice colder now, edged with disbelief. "And you decided to handle it on your own?" Alina's throat tightened, but she held her ground. "I didn't have a choice," she said, her words coming out sharper than she intended. "You were too busy with your investors, your meetings. No one else noticed what was happening." There was a brief silence, and then Marcus let out a quiet laugh, though it held no humor. "So, you're telling me that the Maid saved the company?" His words were laced with mockery, a sting she could feel even if he didn't show it. "I didn't save anything," she said quickly, her voice firm despite the anger rising inside her. "I just stopped it from getting worse." She finally turned, to face him, meeting his eyes for the first time. What she saw there wasn't anger. Not at first, but something darker, something far more unsettling. It was the look of someone who realized they had underestimated the person standing before them. Marcus's jaw tightened as he took in her words. "You're saying this breach, this attack, was inside the company?" Alina nodded, but her expression didn't change. "It's been happening for weeks," she said. "Subtle, silent. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. But I fixed it. For now." Marcus seemed to process this for a moment, his brow furrowing as he took a step closer, his eyes scanning the room like he was searching for something that might explain it all. But there was nothing. No explanation. No easy way to dismiss the truth. Alina could feel the weight of the moment, the way everything that had happened, everything she had uncovered, was pressing in on them both. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew she couldn't back down now. She had done what needed to be done. "You should have told me," Marcus finally said, his voice more controlled now, though she could still hear the edge in it. "You should have come to me." Alina shook her head, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. "No one would have listened," she said, her voice low. "I'm not just a maid. I'm not just the help. But no one cares about the ones who notice the cracks. They care about the ones who fix them." There was a long pause, a heavy silence between them. Alina could feel her heart racing, but she didn't flinch. She wouldn't let herself. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching, evaluating her in a way that made her skin prickle. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, might accuse her again or tell her she had overstepped. But instead, he let out a breath and stepped back. "You fixed it," he said finally, almost as if he were still processing the fact. "I'll give you that." There was a slight pause, then he added, "But this isn't over, Alina. We need to figure out who did this and why. And you," he said, his gaze narrowing just slightly, "you're going to help me find out." Alina didn't respond immediately. She could feel the weight of his words settle in her chest, heavy and uncertain. This wasn't a victory. Not yet. It wasn't over. But for the first time since everything had started, she felt like she wasn't invisible anymore. For better or worse, she had become part of the story now. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The following days passed in a blur of strange meetings and hushed conversations. Alina could feel the tension in the air every time she stepped into the hotel, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Marcus's presence loomed over her, but it wasn't the dismissive arrogance that had defined him before. There was something different now, something sharp but cautious, like he was carefully measuring his every move around her. She had never been part of this world, never thought she'd be thrust into its center. But there she was, caught in a game she hadn't chosen, forced to keep moving forward, not knowing what would come next. Marcus had kept his word, if only in part. He hadn't fired her. In fact, he'd gone out of his way to include her in every meeting concerning the system breach, something that, to Alina, felt more like a quiet interrogation than anything else. She wasn't a part of his inner circle, but she had the uncomfortable feeling that he was watching her every move, studying her, waiting for her to slip. The days felt long, too long, and the nights even longer. Alina found herself unable to sleep, her thoughts spinning in circles. The system log still haunted her, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw the red lights flashing on the monitors, saw the pattern emerging from the data she had uncovered. Someone had planted the back door. Someone close. But who? Who had the access, the knowledge, and the patience to pull it off without being detected? It gnawed at her, a constant pull in the pit of her stomach. One night, after another long meeting with Marcus, Alina walked through the hotel's empty lobby, the silence broken only by the soft tapping of her shoes against the marble floor. She was used to the quiet now, but tonight it felt different. Felt like the calm before a storm. She had just passed the elevator when she heard the sound of voices drifting down the hall. She froze, her senses immediately alert. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, every fiber of her being was telling her that something wasn't right. She moved closer, just far enough to hear the conversation without being seen. Marcus's voice reached her first. "We don't have time to waste. If we don't act now, we're gonna lose everything. The data, the contracts, the deals, everything." Alina's heart skipped a beat. He was talking about the breach. But this wasn't the usual corporate concern. There was something urgent, something desperate in his tone. She edged closer, trying to stay out of view, her breath steady as she strained to listen. "I know," a new voice replied, low and almost strained. "I've got someone working on it. But we can't guarantee that we'll be able to cover it up this time. The traces are too deep." Alina's pulse quickened. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Someone was working on it? Who was he talking to? She had to know. She had to understand what was going on. She couldn't let this go, not when everything was on the line. The faintest sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts, and she quickly stepped back into the shadows, her heart pounding. She waited, listening, and after a moment, the voices faded, leaving only the distant hum of the hotel's systems. But something inside her had shifted. She couldn't keep waiting, couldn't keep watching from the sidelines. If there was a way to stop this, to put an end to the breach and expose the truth, she had to find it. No more waiting, no more wondering. She had to act. The next morning, Alina sat at her desk in the employee room, the weight of the files before her pressing down on her. She had spent hours reviewing every line of data, every email, every log. She had seen the pattern, seen the small but damning clues that no one else had noticed. Someone within the company had been pulling the strings, someone who had the access and the means to hide the truth. But Alina was determined to uncover it. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed in the search query, pulling up a new set of logs. The search results came up fast, faster than she expected, and her eyes widened as she read through them. There it was. A name she hadn't seen before, a name that sent a chill down her spine. Alina's mind raced as she read the details. This wasn't just a random breach. This was planned. And the person behind it wasn't someone on the outside. It was someone inside. Someone with power. Someone Marcus trusted. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers trembling as she took in the full scope of what she had uncovered. There was no turning back now. She had to confront Marcus. She had to tell him the truth. But even as the words formed in her mind, a part of her hesitated. Could she really trust him? Could she trust anyone here? Alina paced back and forth in the quiet of the IT room, her mind running in circles as the weight of the discovery pressed on her chest. The name she had found was not just a name, it was a key to something far larger than a breach, something that could unravel the entire network, the entire structure Marcus had worked so hard to build. She had always known there were cracks in the system, but this was more than a crack. This was a fault line waiting to split everything wide open. Her hand clenched into a fist, the tremble in her fingers betraying the calm she was trying so hard to maintain. The truth had been staring her in the face for days, and now that she had it, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with an alarming speed. She couldn't wait any longer. The hotel was no longer a place where she cleaned rooms. It had become a battleground, and she was standing at the center of it. But even as she made up her mind to confront Marcus, a question lingered in the back of her mind, growing louder with every passing moment. Could she really trust him? Could she trust anyone here? She had already seen how easily the system could be manipulated, how deeply the rot had set in, and how many people were willing to turn a blind eye as long as it suited them. Marcus was the key, yes, but was he the solution or part of the problem? The question gnawed at her, but there was no time to answer it now. She had to act. She had to put everything on the line. With a steadying breath, Alina walked out of the room and headed for Marcus's office. She had avoided him for days, staying out of his sight, keeping her distance, but now the moment had arrived. There would be no more hiding, no more running. She had already risked too much, uncovered too much to turn back now. She approached the office door, her hand hovering over the handle, and for the briefest moment, she hesitated. The air seemed thicker here, almost suffocating. She had never imagined herself in this position, standing before the CEO, ready to confront him with everything she knew. But the truth was undeniable, and it was the only weapon she had left. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, feeling the cool rush of air hit her face. Marcus looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something like recognition, as he took in her appearance. "Alina," he said, his voice still carrying that cool edge. "What is it?" She walked toward him, the weight of her discovery pulling at her every step. "I know who's behind the breach," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "And it's not just a breach, it's a takeover. Someone has been working from the inside, using the company's own systems to sabotage everything." Marcus's brow furrowed slightly, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward in his chair. "What are you talking about?" His voice was still cold, but there was a tension there now, a shift in the way he was looking at her. Alina didn't hesitate. She stepped closer, the papers in her hand shaking just enough for him to notice. "I found the logs. I've seen the patterns. The system has been compromised from within. And the person behind it is someone who's been with the company for years. Someone you trust. Marcus's gaze didn't leave her, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk tightly. His jaw clenched as he processed her words. Who? He finally asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. It's you, Alina said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. The room seemed to freeze for a moment, the air thick and heavy with the weight of her words. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. You've been using the system, haven't you? Alina continued, her heart pounding in her chest. I've seen your name in the logs. I've seen the traces. You planted the back door. You set it all up. The silence stretched on, and Alina could feel every second of it. She had expected resistance, denial, but this was different. Marcus wasn't speaking. He wasn't even reacting. Why? Alina asked, her voice softer now, though the question still hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Why do this? What was the point? Marcus finally stood, his chair scraping against the floor with a low, grating sound. You don't understand, he said, his voice rough. You don't know what's at stake here. Everything I've done, everything I've built, it's all for the company, for its future. Alina's eyes widened, the pieces finally falling into place. You thought you were saving it by destroying it? She whispered, the shock in her voice palpable. You thought this was the only way? Marcus didn't answer, his eyes cast downward as if he couldn't meet her gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the truth hanging between them, thick and suffocating. Alina could feel the finality of it, the realization that the man she had been working for, fighting for, was the one who had caused the damage all along. And yet, there was still something in his eyes, something that didn't sit right, something that made her wonder if this was all just part of something bigger, something darker. She didn't know the answers. Not yet. But she knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the room was deafening, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. Alina stood motionless, her eyes never leaving Marcus as the weight of her words hung between them. He hadn't moved since she'd spoken, his gaze fixed on the floor as if searching for something, anything, to hold on to. Alina could feel the tremor in the air, the quiet tension that seemed to suffocate everything around them. This wasn't just about a breach anymore. This wasn't about data or systems. This was about trust, about betrayal, and about what Marcus had become. Alina had thought she knew him. She had thought he was the man in control, the man who held the reins of this entire operation. But now, standing in front of her, he was nothing more than a man unraveling, a man caught in his own lies. You don't get it? Marcus finally spoke, his voice low, rough with something Alina couldn't quite place. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since she'd confronted him. I did what I had to do. I thought I was saving everything. Alina's heart twisted at his words. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the same desperation that had driven him to this point, to make decisions that had torn everything apart. But even as she saw that, something inside her hardened. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her, not anymore. Saving everything? She repeated softly, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. By destroying it all? By letting everything crumble from the inside out? Marcus's face tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might lash out, but he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, staring at her, as if the weight of his own actions had finally begun to sink in. I thought it was the only way, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I thought if I controlled everything, if I kept everyone in line, it would work. But I didn't know how far it would go. I didn't know it would come to this. Alina watched him, her gaze unwavering. She had heard his explanation, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. And now you want me to help you fix it, she said, a bitter edge creeping into her words. You want me to clean up your mess, to keep covering for you while the system you built falls apart? Marcus didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than any words could. She had seen it now, seen through the facade he had put up for so long, and it sickened her. I'm not your savior, Marcus, she said, the words coming out more forcefully than she had intended. I'm not here to fix what you broke. I'm here because I saw something you didn't think anyone else would. How deep the cracks go. And now, I'm done pretending like I'm invisible. There was a moment of quiet before Marcus spoke again. His voice tinged with something else. Regret, perhaps, or fear. You're right, he said, his voice almost steady now. You're right about everything. But I don't know what else to do. If this falls apart, if everything we've worked for is exposed. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Alina took a step closer to him, her voice low but firm. Then it falls apart, and you face the consequences of your actions. But not with me by your side, Marcus. Not anymore. She turned away then, the finality of her words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. She couldn't help him. She couldn't fix this. It was too far gone, too broken. She didn't know what would happen to the company or to Marcus. But she knew she couldn't stay any longer. The door to the office clicked softly behind her as she left, and she didn't look back. The hallway was empty, silent once again. But this time, it didn't feel suffocating. Felt like freedom. She had made her choice. She was done.